Hello, this is Senior Missional Pastor Mike Abron of Kingdom Construction Crew Ministries. Um, Today we're going to be doing a little topical talk on spiritual covering. We're going to be coming from the book of St. Luke, chapter 22, starting at verse 29 through the 34th verse. And we're going to really define, as Jesus did, and show what an example of covering, spiritual and natural covering, really looks like. In our modern day, we see that so many people use the term spiritual covering abusively. They use it to control people, they use it to manipulate or even dominate people. And they threaten them that if you don't follow what I say, that bad things are going to happen to you. Well, Jesus showed a different example of what spiritual covering really was to him and the Father, and what it should really be like to us in these very verses. So I'm not going to read the verses just like piece by piece. I'm going to just address them and talk a little bit about what's going on in the verse and what example we can take from that. There's going to be four different examples or four principles of the one example of what a spiritual covering is. And so you, the viewer, you're more than encouraged to go and study these, read these, pray about it, see what God says to you. And, you know, that's really how it should be, because the Bible says to study to show yourself approved. So in verse 29, Jesus said that I will confer unto you the kingdom just as my Father has conferred one unto me. And currently this is the NIV version. Of course, I'm really a fan of the KJV, King James Version, because it's actually like poetical. And I'm a poet, so I like, poetical talk. But today we have the NIV, which is also a good version, translation of the Bible. So the first thing we learn in verse 29 is that a covering should want to help you to get and obtain exactly what they have and what they have been given by God. To the full extent, to the extent that even where Jesus told the disciples that greater works that you'll do. So covering, a true spiritual covering will be pushing you to outdo them. They're not trying to get you to be under them and get jealous at your successes and, appreciate your failures because you didn't pass them up. That's not a spiritual covering. They don't try to beat you down and hold you down and hurt you. They are trying to get you to experience everything that God has given them. They're not selfish at all. The second thing we want to take, where Simon, who is Peter, was being addressed to by Jesus. Jesus said, Simon, Simon, Satan hath a desire to shift you as wheat. Or if you read in the NIV version, it'll say, ask to shift you or swift you. And if you think about that, you think about Job, how Job, God had to give Satan permission to Job to do what he wanted to do. And Satan couldn't do anything at first because of the hedge of protection around him. So he had to get permission from God. So Jesus is telling him, the devil desires to destroy you, to take you out. And so the second thing, he said, but I pray for you that your faith may not fail. And, so here's the second thing. Point number 2, a spiritual covering that's true and biblical is going to be looking out for your welfare. Meaning that since the enemy is out to destroy you and things are there to discourage you, they're going to be looking to pray for you, to protect you from dangers, from hurt, from harm, from unnecessary adversities. They're going to be trying to counsel you into the right path. But we see that even when they're in that kind of mind frame, in verse 33, we see that Simon, Peter, said, but he replied, Lord, I am ready to go to prison and to death. He's like, I'm ready to experience whatever I need to in my quest to follow you. And mercifully and lovingly, in verse 34, Jesus said, I tell you the truth, that before the rooster crows, you're going to deny me 3 times. So the third thing is, from verse 33, the third point that we take is that even though a spiritual covering knows that someone has problems, they have things that they're going to fail, they have weaknesses, they don't look at those things to determine their future. You see, Jesus said, I've prayed for you because the devil wants to destroy you. And even though he knew that he was going to deny him, he knew that he was going to be who he was. You know, he knew he was going to have an attitude. He knew he was the type that would cut off the soldier's ear in the Garden of Gethsemane, which he did, and Jesus put it back on. But the thing is that he knew who Peter was. He knew who Judas was before he selected him. And he looked at Peter and he said, you know, I already know what's going to happen, where you're going to fail me at. But a true covering looks past your failures and your weaknesses, and they're always looking towards your future to benefit you, to allow you time to grow spiritually and not beat you down, but to help you grow and move forward in what God has called you to do and designed you for. And so then in verse 34, that he's telling him, you know, I already know you're gonna do this, because verse 33, Peter is like, oh, I know, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna, you know, I'm tough. I can handle this. I can handle whatever comes. And Jesus is like, no, I already know what's gonna happen. So the third thing was that a spiritual covering is gonna look past your weaknesses, and they're gonna push you towards your future. And then the fourth thing is that we also take from verse 34 that Jesus knew what was going to happen and what he was going to do, but that did not stop him from the purpose that he had for him, being Peter. So if you think about it, when Jesus had Peter to tell him, you know, or to answer to him, he says, do you love me? And he asked him this 3 times. And he said, to feed my flock, to feed my sheep, to feed my lambs. You know, he re-emphasized the purpose that was destined for Peter. And Peter was the one who was the first one at the day of Pentecost in the book of Acts chapter 2, who stood up and who was the instrument that God used to initiate the early New Testament church. Of course, all the other followers of Christ and disciples and apostles had parts to play. But Peter was the first one who stood up and declared what God was actually doing, and the church began and was started. So the fourth thing that we learn from that is that spiritual covering is going to always have, they're going to look past your weaknesses, right? And the third thing. But the fourth thing is that they're going to always have a motive to help you to be everything God designed you to be. And they will push you, they will motivate you, they will encourage you, and they will help you to be that. And they will actually support you, because Jesus said, I'll send my spirit and he's going to empower you. So they will actually support you in your endeavors that God has called you to do, specifically, not what they called you to do, but what God has called you to do specifically. And a lot of leaders today who are spiritual coverings, unfortunately, they are trying to get people to do their vision, what they want, and give them the money that they want, or to do and spend their time the way they want to. It's so bad sometimes that even people don't get married to certain folks, or they don't buy certain houses or buy a car without the approval of their spiritual covering. And that's definitely a misuse and abuse. So these are things that the Bible shows, that Jesus showed himself, of what a spiritual covering is. And if anybody shows you anything different, any denomination, any church, leader, it doesn't matter. That's not what spiritual covering is. And I know that can be difficult to embrace sometimes, but the truth is Jesus showed us what a spiritual covering really is as we move forward